Alright, hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Spray and Pray 1000's Verdict. I am Spray and Pray 1000 and today we're going to talk about a game I played a whole lot of on my channel. Today we're going to talk about Fire Emblem Three Houses for the Nintendo Switch. I'm only about 2 years late to reviewing this after only beating it like a year and a half ago. But whatever, things happen. We're going to talk about it because it's quite a lot to talk about. If I boil stuff down, please understand it's not because I skipped out on it. I wrote a kind of decent script for this, and then I said to myself, I'm going to be here for an hour, and I don't want to be here for an hour. Long story short, if you like RPGs, I heavily recommend this game. If you're afraid that Fire Emblem is too difficult for you, I recommend giving it a try anyway. This game has a lot of very accessible features. It's really forgiving. It offers a lot for people. It's got a lot of fun things to it, a lot of good, memorable characters, and a lot of interesting levels, which I really appreciate. And we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty about it. So, without further ado, let's talk Fire Emblem. So, Fire Emblem Three Houses is the latest in the long-running Fire Emblem franchise. After its revival in 2013 with Fire Emblem Awakening, Fire Emblem has just been kind of coasting along, releasing hit after hit after hit, which is something I like because I like Fire Emblem. I liked it even back when I was a kid. And, yeah, that was a long time ago, honestly. And what's cool about this game is that, as the name suggests, there are 3 different factions for you to join. Now, with this comes the single best decision of the game, and also one of the things I dislike the most about the game. And I could really just tell you, again, spoiler-free warning and all that. This game has 3 different houses that you could join. Essentially, you're a mercenary that gets roped into teaching at a church where you teach essentially the military leaders of the future of Fodlan, which is the country you're based in, while under the watchful eye of the archbishop who rules over the land. And, a series of events happens, and then there's a time skip, and then there's war, which is very interesting. And now, pretty much the biggest part about this game is that depending on what house you choose, you can end up in one of 4 routes of the game. And so the first one is that the part 1 pretty much plays the same almost regardless, no matter what you do. However, parts 2, I almost said it like there's 3 parts. Part 2 will be a different version based off of who you chose as your house. So if you choose Black Eagle, there's one of 2 routes that you could go into depending on a critical story choice made halfway through the game, halfway through part 1. And then in the other 2 houses, you're just railroaded into their respective part 2s. This is one of my favorite parts of the game because it's the one where I think a lot of people are you're basically making a decision off of little info and just what you think is going to be the best. And for me, you could go watch my playthrough. I layered it all in order, which I thought was awesome. I very much enjoyed the order I did it in. I feel like it got worse as it went on, though, but that's not to say it was bad. I just feel like I made the best choice first, for me personally. And the worst part about it is that essentially the same thing that happened in Fates is happening here. The only difference is that you don't have to pay for like multiple versions of the game. Because with Fire Emblem Fates, when it came out, only Conquest and Birthright were available, unless you bought the physical like special edition, in which case Revelation came on the cartridge. Everyone else had to download Revelations later. And basically, like, whichever version you pick, the game pretty much does the same thing. If you have multiple versions of the game installed, they give you multiple choices as to what to do at the pivotal moment of the story. And in that game, obviously, without going into too much about it, obviously Revelations is kind of the most fulfilling because it's generally just the happiest, and you get the most diversity in units and gameplay and pretty much the best missions. Every other one, like, I don't want this to be a Fates review, but just know that it kind of does the same thing Fates did, which is not something I really liked. I think that pretty much, and this is going to be the remark I almost close this review on, is that I think Fire Emblem should really look into having like full-on branching stories. I don't think that one decision you make at the 1 hour mark should be the determining factor by the time you're at the 10, 100 hour mark, or anything like that. I think that what Fire Emblem could gain from a system like what Triangle Strategy is purporting to do is by having an actual branching plot line with consequences to it. But regardless, in this game, you end up picking one of 3 class heads, and you go from there. And then part 2 changes. Now, the 4 parts are Verdant Wind, Azure Moon, Silver Snow, and Crimson Flower. Now, out of these 4 parts, again, no spoilers as to what happens within them, Crimson Flower is the most unique out of all of them. However, it is also the shortest. Azure Moon and Verdant Wind are essentially like 2 sides of the same coin. They're not the same, but they pretty much play out very similarly. And lastly, Silver Snow is just kind of the worst path in the game, in my opinion, because it is essentially Verdant Wind minus one mission and a couple context and a couple characters. It feels very much like it was a last-minute addition to the game, or at least it doesn't have the same pizzazz and draw of the other routes. Now, that said, like I said, those 3 pretty much play almost, not identically, but very similarly. I have to give some Crimson Flower a lot of credit. I think it's pretty bold with what it does, and I think that for what it is, it's definitely the most unique path in the game. That said, it's also, in my opinion, one of the easiest paths in the game, and it also is the shortest. So I guess if you're really just looking to get a quick fix, you would do it. Otherwise, Verdant Wind and Azure Moon are just kind of more or less the ones you're going to want to go for. Now, what happens in the gameplay is that gameplay in this game is pretty much divided into, I would say, like 1 of 3 different modes. You're either in the monastery, on a battle map, or like doing menuing. So really straightforward stuff. Like, a lot of this is an evolution of typical Fire Emblem gameplay. So the monastery is essentially this big hub, which is where the game takes place. And in the monastery, what you do is you run around, you could talk to people, you could do activities, and most of all, every week you teach your students, different things. So for instance, in this game, there's a lot of different skills that characters can go into. Obviously, as with any Fire Emblem or RPG, certain characters have an affinity for certain stats. However, unlike most other RPGs and games, any character can pretty much learn any stat. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is viable for everyone. Certain characters have different learn charts and different abilities because, they're individuals. They have different strengths and weaknesses. But if you want to diversify a character or roll them into a different class to get them abilities or stuff that's off the beaten path, the game allows you to do that. The game allows you free control over what you want to do, and I would actively advise anyone who wants to play this game to do so. I would 100% say experiment, try different things, definitely learn these systems because they are going to be invaluable to you 50 hours from now. As for that, you yourself also are subject to the system, so there's different things you could learn. You could train from other faculty, and then later on in the game, you could train from your students. There's all classes people can go into. In order to get into a class, you need to train up your characters, so they have a certain threshold that allows them to take the test for a class. If they have, a minimum amount, there's a chance that they'll get it. And if they have too much, then it's guaranteed that they'll graduate into that class. You could freely switch classes anytime except in battle by just going into the menus and doing it, which is cool. As well as that, you yourself as the professor also have what is called the professor level. Now, the professor level basically dictates how much stuff you could do each Sunday when you're running around the monastery. So, for instance, you can go fishing, you could do gardening, you could do prayer, you could teach people, you could learn off of other people, you could do side quests around the monastery and stuff like that. And that alone is like very powerful. Now, certain things take up time, and essentially your professor level dictates 3 different things: how much time you could spend around the monastery on each free day, how many battles you can go into should you choose to go to battle or go to skirmish, on a free day. Obviously, mission days, you have to do the mission. You can't not do the mission. But other than that, you could opt to do battling to get real experience and other things. And lastly, how many adjutants you can assign to different people. Now, you might remember this system from Fates. Basically, you can assign someone to basically shadow a character, and what they'll do is occasionally they might help out. So, for instance, a guard-based character might step in and block what would otherwise be a strong hit delivered to the character they're shadowing. A healer character that's shadowing a character may heal them randomly. And an offensive character might team up and deal extra damage. Now, it's a cool system. I didn't really use much of it throughout the playthrough. The biggest reason you want to have a character be an adjutant is that you want to build support. Now, this has been in every Fire Emblem game that I could think of. Support is basically two characters will talk with each other. They'll have a little side plot with each other. And and what I liked about this game's skits is that they all reflect back to the main story. Almost every skit in this game has something to do with furthering the world lore, the state of affairs, or even just the characters themselves and their relationships. Now, like every other Fire Emblem game, if two characters have a high enough relationship that are not the main character, at the end of the game they may have a little outro, maybe them getting married or going on an adventure together or something like that. The way the game determines this is fairly simple. If the characters have the highest amount of support with each other, then the game will say these characters are paired together. However, it's possible for you to, through DLC, do other stuff. I'm not really going to get into that. It's really satisfying, and the only reason I talk about this in depth is because it's really satisfying to me when you play these games and you get like a really good ending. And like I said before, all these supports tie into the story. Well, even the characters' endings tie into what they do after the events of the game. And to me, when you have a game that takes this much time to build its narrative and to really flesh things out, getting that fulfillment from characters you've come to know and enjoy and love is really, really strong. It really adds to the strength of the game when you could say, yeah, I feel like this character and this character got married and it really was like a very endearing story, or it was a really cool, romance, or which is a good bromance or something. And then they went off and had further adventures, and it's really cool to think that you got them to this level, right? Especially if you're playing a classic where permadeath's a thing, you made it to the end. You get to see these characters have their, their farewells, their send-offs, and I think that's really strong. I like that about this game. Now, supports also influence things in gameplay, like dodge chance and hit chance and things like that. That's all well and good. Not here to shit on that at all. That's the usual. That's like the practical reason for doing it if you're not invested in the story. Now, the professor has the opportunity to marry someone. You're the only person who can achieve S ranks and can pretty much do so with more or less the entire cast, to my knowledge. Now, what supports are available are obviously determined by who is in your class, which is essentially who's on your army, and what route you're on. Depending on what route you're on, things about skits may change, to reflect events. Characters might not even be around because, they may have parted ways with you, or things like that. Yeah, you get what I'm saying. So your supports are determined, again, by what part of the story you're on and all that, which I totally get. Perhaps the biggest thing about this is, again, supports determine, again, what you can do and who you could do it with. Having that is really strong. The other big thing that you could do in the monastery is that you can recruit students to your school. And when you recruit students to your school, basically, you're teaching a house, there's a couple other professors, you can end up recruiting a lot of different characters. And then in a base game playthrough, you might only have a dozen or so characters, assuming everyone's alive. But if you recruit everyone, I think it's something close to 30 characters you could have. It's ridiculous. It's a lot of people. And that's good because it means a ton of support and everything. You could get people to, pair off and stuff, and you could have a lot of, people trained up for different missions if you want to deploy different strategies, which is cool. It can get a little overwhelming. I definitely could understand how if you're a more casual player, it might just be better to let the game handhold you through that. But it's something I definitely think is worthwhile. I always like it when games give you more options, not less. I feel like the options here are portrayed in a meaningful way. They're not super overwhelming. It's still possible to do just as well. You know, you could even ignore some characters and be fine. And that's what I did throughout my playthroughs, is I tried to make sure that everyone had a partner to end the game with, and also the characters I used had good supports with most of the people around them. Again, if you're getting into the story, the supports are a reward in and of themselves because they lend more to the richness of the world, which in and of itself is fulfilling to find out and to explore. The next thing I will say is, let's get to the actual real gameplay of the game, which is the Fire Emblem gameplay. In Fire Emblem Three Houses, you deploy your characters on missions to fight battles. It's pretty much like any other Fire Emblem game. Obviously, the older ones are more linear. You know, they didn't have a ton of things like paralogs and all that. This game prides itself on having multiple kinds of missions. So, on any given day that's not a mission day, you can engage in a skirmish. If you're playing on normal mode, you can engage in infinite skirmishes if you really choose to. You can also engage in timed skirmishes, which are against slightly stronger enemies. Now, those are, like, the infinite ones are just there in case you just need to level up, right? Like, you're stuck, you just need to level up. But the timed ones are actually the ones that are available on hard mode and above. They're also on normal mode, but on hard mode, they're the only option you have because they want time to be a real factor on a higher difficulty. And you can fight those for more money and more experience and more class skills and everything. You can also do paralogs, which are like side stories for your characters. Oh, let me get this out of here. Okay, good. So they're like side stories for your characters. Doing these paralogs usually gives you some sort of unique weapon or unique item, in addition to having a ton of story, perhaps about the overarching plot, or just the characters in general, which is always very cool. They try to make it so like everything has like at least two purposes it's serving, which I think is really nice. The way weapons in this game work, right? Weapons in this game are like most other Fire Emblem games. You have, your weapon triangle, which isn't as pronounced in this game unless you have certain abilities equipped, which I'll get into in a little bit. There's swords, there's axes, there's spears, there's gauntlets, there's bows, and then there's magic users. And magic works a little differently from weapons. So in this game, weapons again have durability. Unlike, I think Valentia did not have it. Yeah, Valentia didn't have it. And I think Valentia was like the first one that didn't, when it came out originally as Fire Emblem Gaiden. Valentia and Fates did not have weapon durability. This game does. However, when a weapon breaks, it's still usable. So you're not soft locked. You can still use a weapon that is completely broken. It'll have a worse accuracy and power rating, but you're not screwed if a weapon breaks mid-combat totally. That said, don't take this as weapon durability doesn't matter. Hell yes, it does. You better be keeping your weapons pristine. Additionally, magic users, unlike, melee users where they have, their usual everything, magic users have set amounts of magic that they could use. So each spell has a certain amount that you could use it. When you use it, it's depleted. You have to either... you pretty much just have to wait for the battle to end to refresh it. There might be a couple other ways to do it. It's not too common. And through that, you could basically use them tactically. A lot of magic users in this game are incredibly broken and incredibly strong. So I definitely recommend looking into that. This is basically almost like a mage's parade at some points with the things you could do with magic, just tearing enemies apart who have low resistance. Speaking of stats, there are the usual stats in this game. Perhaps the biggest ones are, strength, dexterity. You have speed as usual. If your speed is 5 or greater than your opponent, when you initiate an attack, you will be able to double up or attack twice. There's some weapons that naturally attack twice, like fist weapons and brave weapons. And you could attack potentially up to, I think 4 times. I think you could go even higher if you meet certain criteria, like to say 6 times or something like that. It's very rare to even see that. I think that's why I don't really even know too much about it, because I think I only saw it by like complete coincidence. So yeah. There's also this new ability called Gambit. So essentially you're teaching at this officer's academy. You're teaching your students how to lead units in the battle. And what you're teaching them is how to lead units in the battle. So you can literally have like a battalion of guys behind your units, and they could use different things. So for instance, sometimes they'll just charge forward and they'll like hit enemies and they'll do a lot of damage or something, or they'll basically, restrict them from moving. That's one of the biggest things about Gambits, is that they will restrict enemies from moving on the following turn. There's also other things that they could end up doing, like you could end up poisoning enemies with certain Gambits. You could deal a lot of damage. You could also, there's helpful Gambits like movement increase, or for your teammates. There's also healing for your teammates. There's all kinds of Gambits in this game. Melee, flying, magic, healing, all sorts. There's a lot. It's a ton. And what you can do is you can assign them to different people. They increase your stats, you know, depending on what type of people you assign to them. You can also decrease your stats. So you gotta, you know, it's a give and take, like always. Now, what they are really used for is that later on in the game you start fighting monsters. And monsters will deal a lot of damage. They'll try to hit the squishiest members of your unit. They're usually very big, like multiple tiles or like a big box. And what you could do is that you could have characters gambit them to draw their attention. And when they draw their attention, they are forced to spend their next attack on whoever gambited them last. And what you could use that for is obviously bait and switch strategies. So let's say a monster is about to do a big attack. Well, you could have your cavalry flank him and use a gambit. Boom, all of a sudden he's just directing his attack at the lone cavalryman. You could heal that damage, it's no biggie. Your casters are safe. Monsters are in and of themselves a unique part of the gameplay. They are able to, you could break them essentially by breaking all the squares on their body. When you do that within a certain amount of turns, usually like 1 or 2, you are able to permanently like nullify all their attributes and bonuses. Monsters have multiple health bars, and a lot of times they gain a lot of very powerful abilities when they have these multiple health bars. So it's in your best interest to do it unless you could outright kill them. You also deal more damage to monsters whose squares are broken when you choose to attack them. It's very, it's very complicated, but it definitely makes sense. It's easy to understand, and the more you play the game, you begin to find things that work for you. Now, another thing I should say is that every unit can equip up to 5 abilities, and like abilities work like every other Fire Emblem game of recent memory. It gives you certain stats and certain abilities. Like maybe, for instance, one ability just gives you bonus health, right? +5 to health. Another ability might give you, bonus damage with lances. Maybe one of them even brings back the weapon triangle. Your weapon attacks, your axe attacks are going to be like really good against lances now. So anyone who has a lance better think twice about running up on you. Yeah, stuff like that. And obviously finding out what's the best for each character is part of the joy of playing this game. You can gain abilities either by completing, I don't want to say completing missions. Rarely completing missions will give a certain character certain abilities. But you could also gain abilities by progressing the story. I guess that's the same thing, isn't it? By doing completing classes for different characters. You gain class experience in this game, and once you've gained enough class experience, you master the class. You usually gain an ability and some bonuses for doing that. You could also gain abilities by leveling up your unit's attributes. So like I said earlier, you teach your units like different things like weapon skills or riding or armor skills and stuff like that. If you get that to a certain grade, because they're all graded on a grade from E to S+, you can give your units stuff like more movement or less weight, which allows them to do more things. You could also give them things like Tome Fair, which allows you to deal more damage with certain magic abilities and stuff like that. And all of these systems come into play, and they feed off each other. So as you can see, what you do in the monastery directly impacts what happens on the battlefield. And obviously when you fight on the battlefield, you gain class experience from obviously using your classes. You gain items, you gain other things, and that then influences your monastery gameplay, because you're able to go buy things, sell things, teach characters and all these other things. And basically the whole game, one of the strongest things I like about it is that it has a nice cyclical loop of feedback. So you're constantly pushing things forward, which is always a good thing to have. You begin to get characters that are good at multiple things. You begin to get a bunch of different items, different skills. Characters begin to develop outside of their usual things. So, for instance, maybe one character can become a teleporter, while another character can become a tank that's mounted, while another character can become an archer who can hit from really far away. And adding to all of that, I know, right? More systems is the Crest System. Essentially, some characters in this universe have what's called a crest. It's like a magical marking. It gives them unique abilities. Every time they do something, there is a chance that their crest will activate. And in addition to their personal abilities, every character has a personal ability that cannot be toggled off of them, that is unique to that character. They can learn other abilities, up to 5. They can mix and match, like I said before. There's also crests, which are unique to them based on like the lore of the character and things like that. Now, not every character has a crest, but that also does not mean every character with a crest is inherently better than characters without. Just want to remember that. That's important. Crests will sometimes, for instance, let you save a magic usage. It'll also let you attack a 3rd time potentially, and things like that. And you'll see it like when you're in combat and you see the thing activate. You know, you could see abilities activate. You know, maybe it'll have a little pop-up above your character's health bar and stuff saying crest of so-and-so, or this ability activated, or something like that. Critical hits return as always. You know how that is. I don't need to explain that. And lastly, like I said, there's not really anything negative to say about the gameplay. The gameplay of this game is pretty damn ironclad, which is what I like about it so much. You could pretty much just go right ahead, do what you want, and have a good time. And that's why I really like this game, because almost everything you do directly funnels back into what you do later. And because of that, you're never really wasting time, as long as you're not just like skipping to each mission, I guess. As long as you do something with your time, you're helping something somewhere. Like, the amount of correct in quotations choices you need to make is not really that pressing. There's a lot of things you could do to teach characters, and once you understand how the gameplay flows, it's very fulfilling. You know what you're doing pretty much by default. There's not really too much else to say. All the different maps have like different things to it, and I rather enjoy that, honestly. Lastly, I will say this though, while the characters look pretty okay, I would say that a lot of things in the game world are definitely compromised for the graphics of the Switch. So this game could have looked way better if it had a lot more. Not even, you know, I think when people say that, they always think lighting. I think there's just certain things could have looked better in the game. They definitely cut a lot of corners to really make things happen. Now, that said, I think the game is very, very appealing in its own right. All the characters are rendered during combat, which is really cool. The whole overworld, when you're in a map, is just like flooded with tons of stuff and tons of people running around. It's like there's a lot of effects going on in combat. So I'm not really, again, from the gameplay aspect, it's not really that. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me fix that. From the gameplay aspect, it's not really like bad at all. I think that that's really the strong suit of this game, is not only the story but also the gameplay. And from an RPG, you almost couldn't ask much more from it, right? I think that that's probably the biggest strength. Now, there's also a system in the game called Renown. This has been in a couple other Fire Emblem games. Every time you complete a fight, every time you complete missions and turn in quests, you gain what's known as Renown. It's basically like this pool of points that you can then spend on revitalizing statues that are located in the monastery. And when you revitalize these statues and fix them up, what happens is that they become more valuable. They also give you, and by them becoming more valuable, they give you bonuses to like your unit's stats. They give you more experience gain and all that. So it's in your interest to spend Renown to fix these statues. Now, this game also has New Game Plus, which is always a good thing in an RPG. When you have New Game Plus, your statue progress carries over, and you're also able to like you're able to do certain things. Like you don't start the game, you know, from the beginning with where you left off. You have to reteach things to your characters and everything like that. But at the minimum, what I will say is that you will be able to like level people up. You gain access to the journal, which allows you to access, like you could teach people, you can max out their classes right away. So you could have them go into different paths easier and not worry about them missing out on essential skills. All of this costs Renown. It kind of costs a lot of Renown. So you just want to make sure you're pooling up your Renown constantly. You know, you get a good amount for beating the game. It's kind of like Tales games grade in a way, right? Like you get a lot of grade for beating the game, and you get a lot of grade for doing well in combat. You know, that sort of deal. So there's a lot going on in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Last thing I would talk about is the menuing. I think menus could be a little better. They're kind of a little hard to navigate sometimes. I think they could just be a little bit easier between moving between things. You can't just use an item on a character in the menu. You have to give the item to the character and then back out to another menu and then use the item on them to increase their stats, stuff like that. There's also one complaint I would have is that you can't just purchase like food. Cooking is a big part of this game, and while you could get food by doing gardening or by doing fishing, you can't really get like a lot of meat and things from the game. So you might end up at a point if you're doing a lot of battling and then not a lot of gardening and stuff, and if you don't understand what gardening really can do, you're going to end up at a point where you're going to maybe not have the resources you need to constantly feed your students, because you can only teach your students at maximum efficiency when they're full. Every character who you could teach has essentially like a motivation bar. It's usually divided up into 4 chunks, and each time that you teach them anything, you know, that bar goes down by 1 chunk, and that's why you can only usually teach people 4 times. If you get a perfect teach, it's a random chance. Like if you teach them something really nice or whatever, the game will say, okay, you get a free extra slot to teach them with. You know, in order to get that, you either need to have them be the MVP of a battle, which means only 1 person can get it, or you need to pick rest on your day off, which I don't recommend, or you need to constantly feed them. And I like feeding them because 1, it gives them motivation, and 2, if you do it between compatible people, you can get their support to go up. You can get support to go up for a number of ways: being near someone in combat, you know, sharing a meal with them. Between the professor and someone, you could share it by having like tea time and doing other stuff, giving gifts, which is good. But just as a general word of mouth and rule of thumb, it's better to just do your gardening and do all the fishing and everything, because it also increases your professor level, which is, again, feedback loop. Professor level increasing and going up allows you to do more, allows you to do more missions on your days that you choose to battle. It allows you to do more things every day when you choose to do monastery events, stuff like that. So ultimately, where do we end up? Fire Emblem Three Houses ends up being basically my favorite game on the Switch and one of the best RPGs I've played of all time. I've thoroughly enjoyed the lore, how they fleshed out the characters and fleshed out the gameplay. There was always something new to do, and that is why I did 4 playthroughs of this game and the DLC. The DLC adds a whole bunch of other stuff. I don't want to include that necessarily because I want this to be a verdict of the base game. I 100% recommend this game. I've recommended as much as I would recommend Metroid Dread or Breath of the Wild or Mario Odyssey and stuff like that. Please, I implore you, give this game a try. It is absolutely fun from start to finish. There's a lot of mechanics that allow you to, say, rewind time in combat if you make a mistake. You could choose to go from classic to casual mode. I'm sorry. And you could choose to go from classic to casual at the start of the game, and I'm pretty sure you could downgrade it at any time. I'm not too sure about that. And what that does is instead of in classic mode, it's like classic Fire Emblem. If a unit dies, they die for good. They're gone for good. If there's story essential, but I mean, I don't think that applies in this game, actually. That was kind of weird. In Fate, some characters could be defeated but not die. I don't think they do that in this game. Casual mode, people just return after the fight. They just come back, and then you could use them again. They basically, everyone is then set to retreat when they lose all their HP, which is, if you want to play on that, fine. You could actually select that, I'm pretty sure, independently of your difficulty. So definitely give that one a look. So yeah, what would I give Fire Emblem Three Houses? I'm going to give it one of the highest scores I've ever given on this channel. I'm going to give it a 98 out of 100. And the reason I do that is because for what it is, it's one of the best usages of time I think you could get on the motherfucking Switch. It is a fantastic game with tons of work put into it. And I thoroughly enjoyed almost every playthrough I did between trying different things with other characters, leveling up. And I'm really kind of empty now that I don't have it. It's nothing to play off of anymore. It's kind of weird, honestly. But with that said, it's a great game. The game speaks for itself in my mind. There's not really anything negative for me to say about it. So I hope you guys give it a look, give it a check out, because for me personally, all 4 playthroughs are worth playing and experiencing. I think they're all rich in their own unique ways, except for Silver Snow, kinda. And I definitely hope you try it out. In any event, I am Spray and Pray 1000. Thank you for watching The Verdict, and I will see you next time on The Verdict.